I never thought I'd wake up to find a nuclear bunker being lowered into my backyard. The Homeowners Association had crossed every line imaginable: trespassing, destruction of property, and apparently installing unauthorized nuclear shelters. But what they didn't know was that the FBI had been monitoring their activities for months. What dark secrets was my seemingly ordinary suburban HOA hiding beneath the surface? After retiring from 30 years in construction at age 63, I finally purchased my dream home in Pine Ridge Estates. A 3-bedroom ranch with 2 acres of land backing up to a protected forest preserve. The perfect place to spend my golden years, with enough space for my woodworking shop and that vegetable garden my wife always wanted. God rest her soul. Pine Ridge seemed ideal when I moved in 3 years ago. Quiet streets, well-maintained properties, and neighbors who minded their own business. The HOA fees were reasonable, just $175 quarterly, mainly covering snow removal and common area maintenance. I even attended the first few meetings. Boring affairs about gazebo repairs and community picnics. Everything changed when Richard Coleman took over as president last spring. A stern 59-year-old former military contractor with cold eyes and an even colder demeanor. Within weeks, he replaced most of the board with his hand-picked allies. The monthly meetings shifted from community discussions to Coleman's monologues about security concerns and infrastructure vulnerabilities. Our HOA fees suddenly increased by 40% for what Coleman called essential modernization projects. Anyone who questioned these projects found themselves subjected to surprise property inspections. Old Tom Jenkins received a $750 fine for a barely visible crack in his driveway. Maria Gutierrez was cited for flower boxes that had been on her porch for 15 years. I kept my head down initially. At my age, I've learned to pick my battles. But when they began surveying the edge of my property without permission, something felt wrong. Coleman's right-hand woman, mid-40s, dark ponytail, always wearing that yellow safety vest, would stand at my property line, clipboard in hand, taking measurements and photographs. When I approached, she'd quickly leave, speaking urgently into her radio. I didn't realize then, but those surveys were just the beginning. The first small steps in a plan that would expose a conspiracy far beyond anything I could have imagined in our quiet suburban community. A plan that would put me directly in the crosshairs of people who were used to getting exactly what they wanted. The first real red flag appeared when I noticed unfamiliar trucks parked along our street at night. Unmarked white vans with tinted windows. When I asked my neighbor Frank about them, he shrugged it off. HOA security upgrades. But Pine Ridge had never needed security patrols before. Then came the late-night meetings. Coleman began hosting HOA sessions at 8:30 p.m. instead of the usual 6 p.m. time that had accommodated our community's many retirees. Attendance dropped by half. Those of us who still went found a changed atmosphere. New items appeared on the agenda: perimeter integrity assessment and subterranean infrastructure planning. When I asked what these meant, Coleman stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Just standard HOA business, Mr. Harrison. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. But I was concerned, especially when I received a notice that authorized HOA representatives would need access to my property for a utility easement evaluation. I called the township. They had no record of any planned utility work in our area. I decided to attend every meeting after that. The same pattern emerged. Coleman would race through regular business, then dismiss non-committee members before discussing the mysterious infrastructure projects. That dark-haired woman with the clipboard documented everyone who asked questions. I noticed how she'd corner Coleman afterward, pointing at her list, speaking in hushed tones. One evening, I stayed late, pretending to search for my keys in the parking lot. Through the meeting room window, I spotted them reviewing large blueprints. Coleman traced his finger along what looked like a network of connected underground structures. The next day, I found survey stakes with bright orange flags planted along my eastern property line, without my permission. When I pulled them out, new ones appeared the following morning. I installed a basic security camera aimed at that area. 3 days later, it mysteriously malfunctioned, the memory card completely wiped. Other neighbors who pushed back experienced strange coincidences. The Petersons questioned the new security measures at a meeting. The next day, their car tires were slashed. Retired Judge Williams requested financial records. Suddenly, his mail stopped being delivered due to an administrative error. I may be old, but I'm not easily intimidated. After 40 years dealing with shady contractors and building inspectors, I know when something isn't right. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, demanding explanation for the survey stakes. The response came in the form of a certified letter, routine infrastructure assessment, compliance mandatory per covenant section 5.3. Something was happening beneath the surface of our community, and I was determined to find out what. The morning I found heavy equipment on my property line was when I realized this wasn't just HOA overreach. This was something far more serious. A backhoe, 2 dump trucks, and a crew of 6 men in unmarked gray uniforms had set up a portable generator and begun excavation. No notice, no permits visible, nothing but the roar of machinery tearing into my land. I marched straight over, still in my bathrobe and slippers, demanding to know what the hell was going on. The foreman, a burly man with a buzz cut, barely looked at me. HOA authorized project, so you'll need to contact your board with any questions. He handed me a laminated card with Coleman's number and turned away as if I were invisible. I called Coleman immediately. "We're installing critical water management infrastructure," he said, voice eerily calm. "Your property deed grants the HOA access for essential utilities." This was all covered at last month's meeting. It wasn't. I hadn't missed a meeting in months. I drove straight to the township office and requested information about any permits issued for my address. The clerk found nothing. No applications, no approvals, nothing. I filed a formal complaint, and a township inspector promised to visit the site the next day. But when I returned home, the excavation had expanded. The hole was now nearly 20 feet deep, with metal reinforcement beams being lowered into place. That woman with the dark ponytail and yellow vest was there, clipboard in hand, directing workers with precise gestures. When she saw me watching, she spoke into her radio, and 2 security guards appeared at the edge of my property, arms crossed, staring me down. That night, my phone rang every 30 minutes from block numbers. No one spoke when I answered, just silence, then a click. My internet connection slowed to a crawl. When I checked my security cameras, the feed showed nothing but static. The township inspector never showed up. When I called to follow up, I was told he had been reassigned to a different district. His replacement couldn't fit me into the schedule for at least 2 weeks. I went to my neighbors for support, but doors that used to open remained firmly shut. Through windows, I could see them watching, concern in their eyes, but unwilling to get involved. Only Frank Delgado, my neighbor of 3 years, agreed to talk, but only in the back of his garage, with the radio playing to mask our conversation. "Listen, Jim," he whispered, "this isn't just happening on your property. They're digging all over the neighborhood, always with some excuse about water lines or cable upgrades. Last week, I saw them unloading these huge concrete segments into the Petersons' back lot. Looked like pieces of a bunker or something." When I suggested calling the county sheriff, Frank's face went pale. "My son just got that scholarship from the community fund Coleman manages. I can't risk it. I've got 4 years of college to pay for." The next morning, I found an HOA violation notice on my door, $750 fine for unauthorized landscape modifications, on the very spot they were excavating. Inside my mailbox was a copy of the homeowner covenants with Section 8.2 highlighted. Homeowners who interfere with official HOA business may be subject to significant financial penalties and possible property lien proceedings. They were sending a clear message: back off or suffer the consequences. But they had picked the wrong retired contractor to intimidate. At 63, with a pension secure and no mortgage to worry about, I had nothing to lose and my property to defend. What I didn't know then was just how dangerous questioning the HOA would become, or that my simple property dispute would soon uncover something that would shock the entire county. My son Michael had been worried about me. "Dad, just come stay with us for a few days while this blows over," he insisted during our Sunday call. To ease his mind, I agreed to visit him and my grandkids in Ohio, planning to be gone Wednesday, through Sunday. I made sure the HOA knew about my trip, even mentioning it loudly at the mailboxes when Coleman's associate was nearby. Sometimes, being underestimated as a forgetful old man has its advantages. But I didn't go to Ohio. Instead, I parked my car at the long-term lot at the airport, rented an inconspicuous sedan, and returned home Tuesday night. I slipped in through my back gate and spent the night in my darkened house, waiting. They started at 5:30 a.m., just before dawn. The rumble of a diesel engine broke the morning silence. From my garage window, I watched a convoy arrive. 3 black SUVs, a massive flatbed truck carrying something enormous under a tarp, and a crane that could lift a house. Coleman arrived in his Range Rover, followed by 4 board members. Security personnel established a perimeter, speaking into earpieces like some kind of paramilitary operation. And there she was, dark ponytail, yellow safety vest, clipboard in hand, directing everything with cold efficiency. At 6:15, the crane operator removed the tarp, revealing what looked like a massive metal container approximately 40 feet long. Stenciled clearly on its side were the words, "Nuclear Bunker," and below it, a radiation symbol. The identification number in 1122 was painted near one end. My hands trembled as I raised my camera, capturing everything. The crane lowered the bunker into the excavation on my property line. Workers scrambled to secure it as the safety supervisor checked items off her clipboard, occasionally glancing toward my supposedly empty house. The bunker wasn't just large, it was sophisticated. I could see ventilation systems, reinforced entry points, and what appeared to be communication equipment being handed down to workers inside the structure. This was no water management system or utility upgrade. Coleman and the board members stood at the edge, nodding approvingly. I zoomed in with my camera, capturing their faces clearly. The woman in the yellow vest handed Coleman what looked like architectural plans, pointing to different sections, her expression serious and determined. Then, disaster. My phone buzzed loudly with a weather alert. The vibration echoed in the quiet garage. The safety supervisor's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as she scanned my property. She gestured toward my house, and 2 security personnel immediately started walking toward my garage. I had seconds to decide. Hide and hope they wouldn't search thoroughly? Run out the back? Neither option seemed viable. So I chose the one thing they wouldn't expect. I grabbed my property deed from my desk, straightened my jacket, and walked straight out the front door as if I'd just arrived home. The surprised expressions on their faces confirmed what I already knew. They thought they had been caught red-handed. And they had been. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't the only one who had been watching them. Someone else had been documenting their every move, waiting for exactly this moment to unfold. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, striding directly toward the excavation. The security personnel froze, caught between stopping me and maintaining their positions. Coleman recovered quickly, plastering on that politician smile of his. "Jim, I thought you were visiting your son this week." "Clearly," I said, holding up my property deed. "That's how you planned this trespassing operation on my land." The dark-haired woman in the yellow vest stepped forward, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. "Mr. Harrison, this is a designated utility easement. Your deed explicitly grants the HOA access for community infrastructure installations." I walked right up to her, close enough to read the name on her badge. M. Keller. "That," I said, pointing to the bunker with its nuclear symbol clearly visible, "is not a utility. That a bunker being installed without permits, without township approval, and without my consent on property I've owned for 3 years." The workers had stopped now, all eyes on our confrontation. The crane operator remained in his cab, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Even the armed security seemed uncertain, glancing at Coleman for direction. "This is a community emergency shelter," Coleman interjected, moving between us. "Part of Pine Ridge's disaster preparedness initiative." "Since when does disaster preparedness require armed guards and secretive installations?" I countered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And why does it have a radiation symbol and nuclear bunker painted on the side?" Keller's eyes flashed with anger. Security protocols require certain notifications on equipment. This is standard procedure for emergency infrastructure. Standard procedure? I laughed bitterly. Is that why you waited until you thought I was out of town? Why you've threatened and intimidated anyone who asks questions? Why there are no permits on file with the township? A muscle twitched in Coleman's jaw. Jim, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. That the only arrangement, I interrupted, is you removing this illegal structure from my property immediately. Otherwise, my next call is to the sheriff, the EPA, and every news outlet in the county. Coleman's facade cracked. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This goes beyond your petty property concerns. Is that a threat? I asked, pulling out my phone. Keller stepped forward, her voice dangerously low. Mr. Harrison, cooperation with community security measures is mandatory under Covenant Section 12.4. Non-compliance can result in significant consequences, like what happened to Judge Williams or the Petersons. I challenged. A flash of surprise crossed her face. She hadn't expected me to connect those dots. Remove your equipment in this bunker today, I said firmly, or I go public with everything I've documented. Coleman and Keller exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. Fine, Coleman said finally. We'll relocate the installation. But this isn't over, Jim. Pine Ridge Estates has needs that supersede individual property rights. The board will be reviewing your standing as a member in good standing. As they began issuing orders to secure the site, Keller lingered, studying me with cold calculation. You're making a serious mistake, she said quietly. Some things are better left unquestioned. I held her gaze steadily. In my experience, Ms. Keller, those are exactly the things that need questioning the most. What I didn't realize then was just how right I was, and how dangerous asking those questions would prove to be. That night, my home felt different. Shadows seemed deeper, ordinary creaks more ominous. I double-checked my locks before finally falling into an uneasy sleep around midnight. The next morning, I called the county building inspector, township offices, and local police. Each conversation followed the same frustrating pattern. Initial interest followed by sudden discomfort when I mentioned Pine Ridge Estates and Coleman by name. HOA disputes are civil matters, sir, the deputy said, his tone dismissive. I'd recommend consulting a real estate attorney. The building inspector was no better. If they've removed the structure, there's no violation for us to investigate. But they hadn't removed it. They just covered it with tarps and soil. The bunker remained, buried beneath a hasty camouflage of dirt and newly planted shrubs. My breakthrough came when I visited the county environmental office. The receptionist pointed me toward a young inspector named Marcus Rodriguez. Nuclear bunker, he repeated, eyebrows rising. That would require specialized permits, environmental impact studies, radiation safety certifications, none of which have come across my desk. Finally, someone taking me seriously. Rodriguez agreed to visit my property that afternoon. He arrived in his county truck, clipboard in hand, the official seal on his jacket lending legitimacy that had been sorely missing. We walked the property line as I explained the situation. When we reached the partially concealed bunker site, Rodriguez's professional demeanor faltered. Sir, this is irregular. Very irregular. He knelt, examining the freshly disturbed soil and taking samples. These are industrial-grade anchor bolts. And this ventilation port. This isn't standard residential construction. He issued an immediate stop work order, posting it prominently at the site. I'll need to report this to my supervisor and possibly state authorities. This kind of installation requires multiple approvals that clearly weren't obtained. For the first time in weeks, I felt vindicated, but my relief was short-lived. The next day, when I called Rodriguez to follow up, the receptionist claimed he had been transferred to another district. His replacement knew nothing about my case. That evening, a black SUV parked across from my house. When I walked outside to check my mail, it drove away, only to return after dark. My phone began acting strangely, calls dropping, strange echoes during conversations, battery draining unusually quickly. When I mentioned the bunker in emails to my son, those messages mysteriously failed to send. Most disturbing was the change in my neighbors. People who had waved cheerfully for years now hurried inside when they saw me. Frank, my only ally, texted that he couldn't talk anymore. His son's scholarship had been reevaluated. The dark-haired woman in the yellow vest, Keller, now drove past my house multiple times daily, slowing to take photos or speak in her radio. I may be 63, but I'm not paranoid. Something systematic was happening. This wasn't just HOA overreach. It felt coordinated, professional, and increasingly threatening. I decided to drive to the state capitol to speak with environmental officials in person. But as I packed my documents into my briefcase, a knock at my door changed everything. I approached my front door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Two men in suits stood on my porch, crisp white shirts, conservative ties, and the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. "Mr. James Harrison?" the taller one asked when I opened the door. "I'm Special Agent Terrence Wilson. This is Special Agent David Cortez." They displayed credentials. FBI, not local police. "We need to speak with you about Richard Coleman and certain activities at Pine Ridge Estates," Wilson continued. "May we come in?" I led them to my kitchen, my mind racing. Had Coleman filed some kind of complaint against me? Agent Cortez closed the blinds before sitting down. "Sir, we're not here because of your HOA complaint. We've been investigating Coleman and his associates for the past 7 months." Wilson placed a file on my table. "What you've stumbled into is significantly larger than a property dispute. Richard Coleman's company, Meridian Security Solutions, has been using HOAs across 3 counties to facilitate unauthorized installations. The woman in the yellow vest," Cortez added, "is Mary Ann Keller, former Department of Defense contractor with specialized expertise in underground facilities. She was dismissed from government service in 2021 for concerning ideological affiliations." Wilson opened the file, revealing surveillance photos of Coleman meeting with various individuals in parking garages, remote wooded areas, and private airfields. "Coleman and Keller aren't building emergency shelters," Wilson explained. "They're creating a network of connected facilities for a group we've been tracking. A coalition of extremists with concerning viewpoints about government authority and societal collapse. The bunker on your property," Cortez continued, "is one of 14 similar installations we've identified. Based on materials they've acquired, these aren't simple shelters. They're designed to house weapons, communications equipment, and supplies for what they term the inevitable reset." My kitchen suddenly felt too small, the implications too large. "Why are you telling me this?" Agent Wilson leaned forward. "Because despite our surveillance, we've been unable to gain access to HOA records, meeting transcripts, or the installations themselves. We need someone on the inside, someone they already view as a troublemaker, someone whose continued questioning wouldn't raise additional suspicions." "You want me to spy on them?" I said, the reality sinking in. "We want you to continue doing exactly what you've been doing, asking questions, documenting violations, but with our guidance and protection," Cortez clarified. "Coleman's group has already compromised local law enforcement and several county officials. That's why your complaints kept disappearing." Wilson placed a business card on the table. "We can't force your cooperation, Mr. Harrison, but these people have chosen your community, your neighborhood, to establish part of their network. They're exploiting HOA authority to create infrastructure for potentially dangerous activities." I stared at the card, thinking about my neighbors, my home, the community I'd chosen for my retirement, about Coleman's threats and Keller's cold confidence. What exactly would I need to do? I asked finally. Both agents exchanged glances. "Continue attending meetings," Wilson said, "but this time with our eyes and ears helping you." For a man who planned a quiet retirement, I suddenly found myself in the middle of an FBI operation. Agents Wilson and Cortez transformed my spare bedroom into a makeshift command center, secure laptops, surveillance equipment, and communication devices that looked nothing like my outdated cell phone. "Your role is simple but crucial," Agent Wilson explained during our briefing. "Continue being the concerned homeowner. Attend meetings, ask questions, appear frustrated but not threatening. We need you to be their persistent but manageable problem." They fitted me with recording devices disguised as ordinary objects, a pen that captured audio, eyeglasses with a hidden camera, even a watch that tracked my location in real time. Each morning, I'd activate them using patterns that looked like normal senior moments, adjusting my glasses, checking my watch, fiddling with my pen. My first test came at the monthly HOA meeting. Coleman had moved these gatherings to the community center's basement. Better acoustics, he claimed, though the FBI suspected it was to avoid electronic surveillance. Mr. Harrison, Coleman acknowledged me coldly when I raised my hand. I trust the landscaping issue has been resolved to your satisfaction? Hardly, I replied, putting on a performance of the cantankerous old man they expected. You've left equipment tracks all over my property, and I want documentation about what exactly was installed. Keller watched from the corner, her dark ponytail pulled tight, yellow safety vest exchanged for a blazer, but the ever-present clipboard still in hand. Her eyes narrowed as I spoke, assessing, calculating. After the meeting, I accidentally left my recording pen near the board table when gathering my belongings. 20 minutes of captured conversation revealed Coleman and Keller discussing accelerated timeline concerns and perimeter security protocols. Over the following weeks, I became the FBI's eyes and ears. I took walks that happened to pass by installation sites, photographing vehicles and workers. I engaged other homeowners, identifying which ones seemed fearful and which ones appeared complicit. I requested HOA financial records that the FBI used to trace money flowing from offshore accounts through Meridian Security. The more I discovered, the more alarming the picture became. This wasn't just a bunker network. It was infrastructure for what Coleman called the contingency government. Maps in the HOA office showed locations of water treatment facilities, power substations, communication towers, all marked with strange symbols and annotations. The danger became personal when I discovered a listening device in my kitchen light fixture. Agent Cortez removed it carefully, explaining, "They're watching you too, Mr. Harrison. We need to be even more cautious now." The operation reached a critical point when Coleman announced a special closed session for infrastructure planning. Agent Wilson provided me with a thumb drive. "We need you to insert this into any computer in that room. It will copy files without leaving traces." Getting into that meeting required a calculated risk. I arrived early, complaining loudly about a water stain on my ceiling that I blamed on their excavation. While Coleman dealt with my distraction, I placed the thumb drive in the laptop Keller had left connected to the projector. 4 minutes later, it was done. I pocketed the drive during the confusion of other members arriving, then left after being told once again that this was a committee-only meeting. That evening, Agents Wilson and Cortez reviewed what we captured. Their expressions grew increasingly grave as they scrolled through documents, blueprints, and manifests. "Mr. Harrison," Wilson said finally, "we've got enough. We're moving to the next phase." The operation moved with precision at 4:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. I watched from my window as unmarked vehicles quietly positioned at strategic points throughout Pine Ridge estates. Agent Wilson had been clear. "Stay inside, shades drawn, doors locked. This is the most dangerous phase." From my darkened living room, I observed dark figures moving with tactical discipline, FBI agents in raid jackets, accompanied by specialists in hazardous materials gear. They converged simultaneously on Coleman's house, the community center, and 3 other properties identified as key installation sites. The stillness of pre-dawn shattered with coordinated efficiency. Bullhorns announced federal authority. Spotlights illuminated targets. The command FBI, search warrant, echoed through the previously quiet streets. Through my field binoculars, I could see the raid at the newest bunker installation 3 blocks over. Keller was already there, directing early morning work in her signature yellow vest. Her face registered shock as agents surrounded the site, weapons drawn. She raised her hand slowly, clipboard falling to the ground as they secured her. At Coleman's residence, the operation met resistance. A burst of radio chatter from the FBI equipment in my spare room indicated gunfire. Moments later, I saw Coleman being escorted out in handcuffs, still wearing pajamas, a look of cold fury on his face as he scanned the neighborhood, perhaps looking for whoever had betrayed him. By sunrise, 17 people had been taken into custody. The entire HOA board, key Meridian security personnel, and several contractors. News helicopters circled overhead as federal agents brought out evidence in sealed containers. Weapons, electronic equipment, document boxes filled with records. Agent Cortez arrived at my house mid-morning, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We found exactly what we expected and worse," he explained. The bunkers contained military-grade weapons, encrypted communication systems, and detailed plans for securing what they called strategic assets throughout the county. He showed me photographs of the bunker contents, rack upon rack of assault rifles, ammunition stockpiles, military-style rations, and advanced communications equipment. One image showed a wall covered with maps of the region, key infrastructure marked with timestamps and team assignments. Coleman wasn't preparing for natural disasters, Cortez said grimly. He was creating infrastructure for what they call the contingency government, a parallel power structure they planned to activate during what they believed would be an inevitable societal breakdown. The bunker on my property, the one that had started this whole investigation, turned out to be a command and control node, positioned specifically because my land offered line of sight to 3 cell towers and the county water treatment facility. As federal agents continued processing the scenes, my quiet retirement community had transformed into the epicenter of what news outlets were already calling one of the most significant domestic extremist plots uncovered in recent years. The raid on Pine Ridge estates dominated national headlines for weeks. News vans lined our streets, reporters ambushing residents for comments about the bunker conspiracy and suburban extremism. Property values plummeted overnight as potential buyers shunned what one cable news host called America's most paranoid neighborhood. For the first days following the raid, I kept to myself, blinds drawn. The FBI had advised maintaining a low profile until they could ensure all network members had been identified. But isolation wasn't sustainable. This was still my home, my community. The first community meeting after the arrests was held in the local middle school gymnasium. Nearly every resident attended, faces I recognized but had rarely spoken with, all of us connected now by shared shock and uncertainty. County officials outlined what had happened. Coleman's organization had systematically targeted HOAs across the region, installing board members, modifying covenants, and exploiting legal authorities granted to community associations. Pine Ridge was their most developed operation, with 3 functional bunkers and 2 more planned. The FBI permitted me to acknowledge my role once the immediate investigation concluded. I expected resentment from my neighbors, the old man who brought chaos to our community. Instead, I found something unexpected: gratitude. "We were all afraid to speak up," Marie Jenkins told me, squeezing my hand. "They threatened our mortgages, our insurance, our children's scholarships." Frank Delgado embraced me publicly. "Jim stood up when the rest of us couldn't," he announced to the assembly. "He protected Pine Ridge when we were too scared to do it ourselves." Recovery began slowly. A court-appointed administrator managed HOA affairs, while residents formed committees to rebuild proper governance. I was asked to serve on the oversight board, but declined. At 63, I had no interest in community politics. I had seen enough of that world. The legal aftermath brought unexpected financial compensation. Coleman's frozen assets and Meridian Securities insurance policies funded settlements for affected homeowners. My property damage claim brought a substantial check, enough to completely renovate my workshop and establish a community garden on the remediated bunker site. Most of the bunker components were removed during evidence collection, but the underground structure proved too costly to completely extract. Instead, environmental engineers converted it into what it had falsely claimed to be: an actual storm shelter and emergency supply depot, now legally registered with County Emergency Services. Agent Wilson visited 6 months after the raid. "The investigation has expanded to 11 states," he informed me over coffee on my deck. Coleman's network was larger than we initially believed. Your cooperation helped us unravel something that could have had serious national security implications. When he asked if I regretted getting involved, I gazed across my backyard to where neighborhood children now played near the community garden that had replaced the hidden bunker entrance. I bought this place for a quiet retirement, I told him. Instead, I got a reminder that communities require vigilance, that standing up for what's right doesn't end when you collect Social Security. The strangest outcome was that Pine Ridge eventually became stronger. With secrets exposed and fear dispelled, neighbors began to truly know each other, creating the community that had been advertised but never actually existed under Coleman's shadow. That confrontation at the edge of an excavation pit, one 63-year-old man standing up to a conspiracy, hiding behind clipboards and safety vests, changed everything. Sometimes the greatest threats aren't foreign enemies, but the quiet corruption of authority right in your own backyard. No matter your age, standing your ground against abuse of power isn't just about protecting your property. It's about protecting the very foundation of community and freedom. The most dangerous bunkers aren't the ones underground. They're the ones we allow to be built through our silence.